Okay. Hello all. Welcome to Android 11 Meetup. Great to see you all here. Thank you so much for joining over a weekend. So it's quite exciting to see a lot of features that Android 11 has come up with. So before starting with our event, I'm not going to take a lot of time. Just giving you a brief uh, introduction about the event and about the GDG Chennai as a community, what we do. So as a GDG Chennai, we try to do workshops and meetups, monthly meetups. And since this pandemic is there, we have moved to the virtual events. So we usually do that nowadays. Um, Apart from that, we also do a conference called DevFest annually. Okay. So if you want to know more about GDG Chennai, you can go to meetup.com/GDG Chennai. And you can also follow us on a Twitter, GDG Chennai. So in today's talk, it's gonna all about Android 11. And if you have seen our agenda, I'll also quickly talk about let you know. So there are gonna be two talk, one from the Amrit on what's new in Android 11, and one talk. The next talk gonna be from the Somasundaram. We'll be talking about machine learning in Android platform. So without wasting a time, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Amrit Sanjeev, who is a Google staff developer advocate at Google, and he's also a Android geek. So keep ready your questions. So we'll be talking about what are the new features in Android 11, and also if you have any questions related to Android 11, don't hesitate to type in comment box. We'll be taking your questions at the end of Amrit's session. So over to you, Amrit. I'll just add in.
Thank you, Abhishek. Hi, everyone. Hope all of you are taking all the precautions and staying safe. In this session, I want to talk about the top features of Android 11. There are so many features that the time slot that I have wouldn't do justice if I go deep into each of them. So I'm going to skim through them, most probably touch upon the surface of each of these features that I think are important for developers. And the whole idea is to kind of give you a pointer that something like this exists. And you might want to take a look at that and study more deeply about it. My intention is purely from a developer's perspective, what might be the things that will impact you, and run through why some of those changes will impact your applications and why you should actually take care of them right now. Yes, Android 11 is in beta, which means most of the APIs are now stable. So it's a great time for actually ensuring that your apps are compatible. And if there are questions, please feel free to ask me during the session. You can ask that, and Abhishek and the team will actually keep that ready, and we'll try and answer most of those questions towards the end of the session. So let's start off very quickly. Well, this is what I do as my day-to-day job. I'm a developer advocate at Google. I manage the partner developer team in India, and a good majority of my career I've worked on Android. So a lot of people know me as the Android, know me for my work in Android, but then yeah, my career spans over different technologies too. It's not just Android. I'm slightly older than Android, so I have worked on other technologies also before that, before Android was released. So that's what I do at Google right now, mostly on the partner relationships, and work with the large partners like Flipkart, Myntra, and all the others of that nature to ensure that they have the greatest experience. They can bring about the greatest experience on our platforms. And today's agenda is I want to focus on the areas in Android are the overview of the top features. Like I said, it's only going to be a quick overview. This is not going to give you a deep understanding of all of the things. This will give you a pointer of what needs to be learned, and you will have to go back and start looking through the documentation that we have, or the deep dive sessions that we've been releasing as part of the 11 weeks of Android program. So please do take a look at that deeply and then start making changes accordingly. There is a focus on privacy related changes because that's an area that we've worked a lot on. And that is going to be something that will have its own separate section that I'll be touching upon. This is quite impactful. This is very important in the current scenario for all the apps, and something that you should not overlook as a developer. And there are some towards the end. I'll talk about some of the interesting new features that we have added to the OS. A lot of the OS has been stabilization and hardening of the OS, but there are also new features there which you might be able to take advantage of and create more better user experiences or unique user experience for all of your users in your app. So let's start with the areas that we were focusing on. Like every year, we have a collection of themes that we actually take for Android. There were things like performance, privacy and security, helpful innovation, people, product excellence. These were some of the top categories that we had actually chosen for Android 11. And you will see that some of these features that I'm going to talk about fall into these buckets. Now, every year, this is the timelines that we use for we used with Android, and this is what was given earlier. There are some slight changes to this due to COVID crisis. There was certain things which were delayed slightly, but more or less were on track. So we have three phases in which how we release Android, and this has been a standard process for many releases now. The early phases are called the developer preview phase. This is when developers can actually start trying out new features and get a feel of how the new APIs are, what will be the impact of that on their applications, and more importantly, give feedback to the team to tell them why some APIs might not work, what might be things that require to be changed, or if you really like an API, yeah, that's also feedback that you can share with us. And then it moves to and then there are multiple DP releases. So for this one, there were three: DP1, DP2, DP3, and then there was a beta phase. In the beta phase, it's more like the APIs are kind of stable. We don't make many changes unless we find a major bug. We don't really kind of change a lot. This is also a time when people can start installing the app on their devices as an over the air update by joining the beta program. Developer preview requires you to flash it by for developer review. Yes, it's mostly for developers, right? So that's not an over-the-air update. It's usually something that you will unlock the bootloader and then flash the OS. With beta releases, you can actually do an over-the-air without losing your data. You can update the version of the OS. And then we work on the platform stability phase, and finally in Q3, sometime in Q3, we are planning to release the final version to all the devices that are supporting this one. So these phases do mean different things for developers. In the developer preview phase, try and understand the changes, give feedback. Most importantly, try and provide feedback. And that is very important to ensure that the platform is actually evolving, considering all the developers' needs. There might be regional differences. There might be things which are not something that so it could be a regulatory difference in a region which might require an API to work differently. These are things that you can actually provide feedback for and help us kind of ensure that all those conditions are taken care in the next version also. During the beta phase, most developers should actually focus on ensuring that their apps are actually tested against this version of the OS. Find out the places where your app actually needs to improve, or rather needs to mitigate for the changes that are there in the OS, and then sort out a plan to kind of go ahead and make the changes so that when the app runs on the final build of the OS, the new OS, there are no crashes or unexpected behavior. This is important because a lot of the devices, a lot of your users who are your top users might actually move on to the newer platform very quickly, and you should not break the experience for them when the platform comes out. And you should test early during the beta. You should actually start test and make the changes so that when the final release happens, users don't have a bad experience with your app. Now, what should you do in a developer preview? This phase, every year it is there, but I was going to call out the developer preview phase. And the reason for calling this out is a lot of people skip this and only start testing in beta in our region. And that's something of a miss, in my opinion. During developer preview, you should get an understanding of the tools, the details of what are the changes that are going to happen and in what timeline the whole things how all of this will happen. You should, as a developer, set up a test environment or a runtime environment for you to start playing around with the with either the device or the emulator which has the right version with the new version of the OS. You should also ensure that your Android Studio may be a parallel setup where you download the preview SDK and setup guides, ensure that the tool set is working for you correctly, and also learn about what is new. Once you have a fair understanding of what is new, you know the areas that will actually be the areas that your application will be impacted by these changes. Test your apps in those areas and then go ahead, create a plan and update the app. This is something that you should start planning in the developer preview phase itself. A lot of teams don't update their apps during developer preview because the APIs might change. That's fair. They update it during beta, but they create the plan for update during the developer preview phase, and that's actually a good practice to actually to do. Primarily from the fact that some of these applications are really large, and you really need some time for it to be tested. So having it start somewhere at say February, March time frame will give you a couple of months and many sprints to kind of make the changes be available to users in a phased manner rather than one large change, which might be trickier to kind of ensure stability and things like that. So you will have multiple sprints for which all these changes can be pushed out if you plan very well in advance. Now, let me jump into the changes that are there in terms of the OS in itself. I'll start with the privacy changes. There were many things that we actually changed. From Android 10 onwards, there's been numerous features that we have been adding in order to protect the user's privacy. We've got a ton of good feedback from external developers, which has allowed us to actually narrow down on the focus areas for Android 11. And based on success of Android 10 and the feedback, we've been able to categorize some of the areas in which we made some changes, and I'm going to talk about them in the upcoming slides. I'll start with scope storage. Scope storage was introduced in Android 10. This was a mechanism by which we actually protected the data that was created by an application and protected the user's data privacy from other applications accessing it. In Android 11, so if you take your storage, there are two types of storage. One is your internal app storage, and then there's the external storage. Before Android scope storage was introduced in Android, if you actually get the permission to read external storage, you can access any file in external storage. And that led to applications scanning through folders, understanding what other applications were writing, reading files which they did not create. And there were multiple privacy concerns because of this malicious activity that apps were doing. This is something that we want to lock down on. And now you have the model of scope storage in which your data is divided into two types. One is your media files and other files. For media files, you have media files which could be audio, video, or it could be the documents. It could be it could be audio, video, or image files. Now there are different media stores, so you can actually go request permission to access the media store and then have access to all the files that are added to media store. So as an app, if you're creating data which is media type and you want other apps to access it, you are expected to add them to the media store so that other applications, after the user provides the permission to access media store, can still access it. For any other file in the file system, the application will have to let the user choose it using the system picker. The intention of doing this is to make sure that the app does not access any file without the user understanding or without the user giving it permission to do that. If the user is choosing a file using the file picker and providing that to the app, then the user is automatically giving his or her consent, right? So that is something that we've introduced here. So any other file, use the system picker to pick it. But there are some files which require, like a file manager or a backup and restore apps, antivirus apps. These are all apps that really require full access to the storage. So we have introduced a new permission for that, but that permission is gated behind a Google policy. So applications will not be able to add that permission and get access to all of it just by adding the permission. It also has to work by the basically abide to those Google Play policy. guidelines and ensure that that is a primary use case of the application. You cannot add a secondary use case which requires all file access and then request for this permission. Then you most probably will not get it. I would suggest you to take a look at the privacy policy and understand what these changes are, what the changes are, and decide whether your app can get that permission or not, if at all it requires that full file access permission. The next point I want to talk about is one-time permission. Uh, this is something that we introduced in this build, where while using the app was something that we introduced in 10. And we saw that a lot of mostly like 60 to 70% of users were actually switching to that while using the app permission model. And now with the one-time permission model, there are many use cases. If you would actually take a look at it, you might just give the permission to say read all the photos, just because you have to pick a profile photo while you're signing up for in an application. So there are many use cases under which an application might not require this permission, other than that one single instance where it needs it. So this one-time permission is done in such a way that you can actually provide the permission for just that one session, and after the session, the application no longer has that permission. And if it requires it again, it will have to request the user back. The user can always deny. And one other change that has in the dialog, if you would notice, is the deny and don't ask has been converted to deny. And if the user denies giving that permission multiple times, then the app will lose the option to ask that permission. So bear this in mind, that earlier deny was one option, deny and don't ask was another option. Now if the user just clicks deny multiple times, then the application loses its ability to request for the permission. And that is a behavior change which you will have to work out and figure out how you want to mitigate it if you absolutely need that permission to go any further. Now, auto reset permission is another thing which is introduced in Android 11. The system will reset the permission of your apps if you have not used it for a extended period, and it will check. So this allows a check for permissions before accessing any sensitive data. And it will be like, if you lose the permissions, the next time you access it, it will be exactly like you asked it for the first time. So the permission dialog will come up. The user will have to kind of give access to it. The reason for something like this is because a lot of users install apps, give all the permissions, and then forget about these apps. These apps continue to be able to capture information and have access to disk, or have access to the sensor data and things like that, even though the user is not using it. With the auto reset permission, what happens is that the system will automatically toggle and remove these permissions for apps that are not used for an extended period of time, and that leads to better user experience and privacy in the long run. There are some applications which will then we also understand that there are some applications which genuinely requires us to actually have access for an extended period, because users don't usually log into them and verify or use those applications for extended period of time, but their effect is there. Like services will be running in the background, or service will be running as a foreground service, and then showing information to the user. In such cases, you have a new setting called action application details setting page, which will load up, and you can actually provide that permission to the user, where this auto reset will not remove it from the auto reset feature will not remove the permission for that app. Now, when you take foreground services in Android 10, we introduced the concept of foreground service types. Their applications will have to declare their intentions to access the information in the foreground service. So there were things like media projection, location, sync, syncing data, media player, phone call. Some of these things were defined as types for foreground services. So if a foreground service wanted to actually capture location, it had to declare that in the manifest. If it is not declared, there's no crash that happens, but the foreground, the location data is never shared with that service by the system. It will always return null for any data that is being requested from the APIs. Now in Android 11, we are adding two more: microphone as well as camera. So now your foreground services will have to declare that it needs camera access or it needs microphone access. Uh, Otherwise, data from these two sensors will not be actually sent to those services. The side effect for some of the applications is that, and I've seen this seen this with some of the application in our region, that especially for camera, they use a service to kind of preload the camera APIs and ensure that the when the user actually clicks on the service or clicks on the UI, they have a snappy experience of launching the camera. And those sort of services will again now will have to start declaring this intent or declaring this foreground service type. Otherwise, the camera will not, the sensor will not actually send any data to those services. So just bear in mind that change. From a notification perspective, there are some changes also. This is a quick notification change that I want to. So foreground services, for instance, earlier you could not swipe them out. Now you can swipe them, and they will actually come and sit at the bottom of the bot. There is a new tile for it, silent notifications, where it will actually come down in a minimized format. If you want to actually expand that, you can click on that notification and expand back into the full screen one. This is just a user facing change. As a developer, you don't have to do anything. Just have to understand that the users might see this differently in Android 11. Package visibility. This is another change which might affect your apps, and you want to kind of look at it very carefully. Especially, there is a lot of libraries that people use blindly, which actually does this package search. So before you call another application, or before you call an intent of another application, you might query by using the package name, package manager, to understand if that app is already installed. And that's a standard practice a lot of people would do. If you just go and search for how do you find out if an app is installed, even on Stack Overflow, using the package manager would be the first answer that you're going to get. But in Android 11, what we have done is that we have limited this in certain ways. You can query, applications can query specific packages or for specific intents. That is all they can do, and these two things have to be declared in your manifest before you can query it. So if you want to say check for XYZ application, com.gdg.xyz, if that is the package name that you want to query for, you have to use as the queries element in your manifest and declare in your manifest that you will be checking for this package. This is the package for which I need visibility to understand if this is installed or not on the device. If you don't provide that, the package manager will give you a null. So you will not be able to decide whether it's installed or not. Now, here, or you can give a specific intent. All app, give me the list of all packages, or I will be able to query all the packages which can service an intent. Say like a share intent for a particular data type, say JPEG or something like that. This is for actually situations where you might be creating a completely new share interface or something like that. And that is where the intent model gets used. And if you were specifically looking for another application, then you might just use the specific package name itself. There are we also introduced a new permission called query all packages, which is again gated by a policy, and this is only awarded to specific packages where like special cases where the app needs to actually check for what all the packages that are installed on the device. This actually helps in managing user privacy a lot, from a perspective that a lot of apps actually list out what all other applications are installed on the device without really letting the user understand that. Because once you give the permission to check for allow to use the package manager, then they can find out what all packages are installed on the device, and a lot of people actually track that information. And that is not actually a good practice, right? This particular safe privacy feature will stop apps from actually take that data from unassuming users. Moving on, tracking private access. So we talked about data access and the permissions and also the privacy policies around that. But if you have a large project which has like hundreds of thousands of lines of code, then you run into this problem that identifying where data access is happening is a tricky thing. It could be within a library that you're using. It could be in a completely different module that was there for a long time. So this is where app uh, the apps ops manager class will come into picture. Where you can actually determine from which module and which feature private data access is happening. This helps you track down things and kind of put mitigation plans in place. This is something completely new in Android 11. I definitely would encourage you guys to kind of take a look at this because it's an interesting API, and also with the interest of safeguarding your users' privacy and not having Play Store kick your app out of it for unnecessary or unintended private data access. You want to kind of definitely check using this API whether any of your code is doing it. This again is important in our region from a perspective that a lot of apps use SDKs indiscriminately without really looking at what all they're collecting and what all they're sharing. So there are sometimes and I've seen this play policy violation happen before, where the developer has never collected anything unintentionally, or I mean, developer hasn't connected anything in with a malicious intent. They have never written any code to collect any information and share it to their servers, but the third-party library they were using did that, and their app got flagged for it. Please do understand that any SDK that add to your app for creating a particular behavior or use case is also considered to be your app, and any behavior of that, if malicious, is accounted to your app again. So Play Store and other app stores will actually remove your app for breaking their policies. So be very careful about it, mindful about adding new SDKs that you're not aware of, and use tools like this to figure out if there's any unintended private data access. This is a page which I'm just put in there that it summarizes some of the changes. I will let you folks, when I share the deck, you can actually take a look at that and look through more deeply here. I'll quickly move on. In the interest of time, I'm going to quickly go through the new feature set that we have. The app compatibility framework is one of my favorite features in Android 11. So what we've done is, this is a new tool that we've introduced for debugging and testing. It's only going to be there in developer preview. The final build of the OS will not have this. So this is only for a developer build, a developer preview build, and only for developers. This is not a user-facing feature at all. What we have done here is, there is an ability to turn on or off a certain feature. Say, for example, if there is for example, scope storage, you will be able to turn off scope storage and continue as before, and you can individually test the impact of each of the changes that are there in the OS, or a combination of these changes that are there in the OS, depending on your test case. Many cases we've seen many cases where the login screen itself breaks, basically because there is a change, and the app could not be tested further because from a first page itself, there's the new change in the OS has caused a crash, and the team is not able to proceed any further without actually fixing that problem. In a case like with app compatibility, you might be able to turn off the feature that is causing that crash and then continue testing further. And this also allows you to kind of turn on one feature at a time and start testing more deeply and more thoroughly, ensuring that there are no side effects to your application from the changes that are there in the next version. Refresh rates. This is something that we've seen mostly on ads for these phones, but there is a lot of implication for multiple refresh rate support. With Android 11, you can actually set your refresh rates, and that is super useful, because if you have a very heavy processing or there is heavy computation that is required for an app to run, you might want to kind of reduce the refresh rate and say maybe run instead of 60, maybe run at 30 hertz, to ensure that your app does not give a bad experience to the user where it's missing a lot of frames. This is something now many displays are actually supporting multiple multiple refresh rate settings. Earlier, the OS in 10, the OS was able to decide whether it should run at a at a higher refresh rate, or should it throttle down to a lower refresh rate depending on situation. Now, apps using the SDK or the uh, NDK can go ahead and ensure that your app is running at a certain refresh rate, and that will help you give a better experience to the user in the long run. There is a nice article about why refresh rates are important. I will share the link towards the end in the resources section of this deck. Please do take a read of that. That will give you a better understanding of this, more than a marketing thing, to how this affects developers like us and the experience for users. Uh, the other feature that we introduced was resume on reboot, which is actually going to give you a better experience when you have on-the-air updates. If you would see that on-the-air updates earlier to 10, you would, if you have an OS update, you would update the OS and then you will have to punch in your PIN for your system to complete the changes. Now, with resume on reboot, you can actually we can schedule the installs to happen when the user is not using the devices, maybe plugged in, and in the middle of the night you could download the OTA and update and reboot automatically. And there is support for direct boot for the device encrypted storage part. That support still exists like previously, but the device will be able to run after a reboot without limiting a lot of the functionality. Some data access will be restricted because of device level encrypted storage, but that, like, because of features like direct boot, but the rest of it will actually run much better. There is a 5G API support right now. This has minimal impact of Indian applications as of now, unless you are actually an application developer whose application is running on networks which are 5G enabled and on devices which are 5G enabled. The whole idea is that we're supporting 5G as a 5G API, which will give a better experience for users whose device handset support it, and you are also on the network that is actually supporting that. At the moment, we do have some handsets in India which have 5G support, but our networks are not supporting it yet, and hence, if your app is only limited to India, this is an API to keep in your mind, but not necessarily something you can use right now. And there are some screen recording improvements or call screening improvements that we have done. This is only if your app is a caller app or a dialer app. You really need to look at these ones and actually have. I mean, you can really use this information as such, because apps can now report rejection details and things like that, which allows you to customize the experience for the user a lot more. Wireless ADB. This has been there. This has been there as a third-party tool for some time, but now it's actually supported within the OS itself. So that is very stable. Most of us are not using our debug cables anymore, because if the phone is on the same network, you can wirelessly install, debug, see your logcat. So all those USB cables are no longer required, and you can actually play with it, or start debugging your phone from Android Studio or all the other ADB tools without really having a USB compatible USB wire required. And this is easy. This is straightforward, very simple to set up, and a very useful developer tool that is added to the OS. Screen recording, again, there are some UI changes to it. One of them is that the notification is now a persistent notification in red, so the user really understands that screen recording is happening and they don't miss that part. There is also control for audio as well as show screen touches. These were two features when people were doing screen recording. They always went back to settings and changed, and they had to come back. And so we have now given that as part of the notification that is coming in. So you can expand the notification and then toggle these controls from within the notification itself. So you don't have to go into settings and lose time there. There's a notification history that's added. So if you by mistake swiped out a notification, then you can always access it from the notification history tray, and there all your notifications will appear, and other pings will appear in a dedicated interface. The one UI that I've shown here is not the final thing. but you can expect the functionality to behave very similarly, where if any of your notifications are swiped out, you can always go back to your notification tray and see details of that notification. And lastly, non SDK APIs. Like as you were aware, we have those whitelist, graylist, and blacklist concept that's been there for the last few releases. For those who don't know, whitelist is a set of APIs that you can use without worrying about compatibility and things like that. Blacklist are APIs that you should not be using. They are only used. They're only available there for platform level usage, and you should not rely on those things. There are a lot of APIs which and usage of blacklist APIs will lead to undesirable results. There's no consistency on how they will actually perform across devices or across different manufacturers or across different versions of the OS. Now, there's a gray list where we recommend you to change it as quickly as possible. From That is more like it will work if you use something in the gray list. It will continue to work, but maybe not in future releases. So if you find that your app is using something in the gray list, then you should actually consider that as a warning, and then ensure that you actually move it out of that and use an alternative API, which is a whitelisted API instead. And lastly, I want to touch base on permission uh, termination status. Sorry, process termination stats from the OS. There is an app exit info buffer, which is actually ring buffer, which is actually there on the there in the OS right now, which basically what it does is that when the app exits, it actually writes to this ring buffer, and it can actually tell you how when your app exits, information related to the exit event is stored in this buffer. So since this is historical information, you can actually pull that data and then use that information to better understand ANR's crashes which are not getting reported by your crash reporting tools and things like that a lot better. I'm not going to jump into details of this, but this will be really useful for finding some of those tricky bugs that otherwise you find very difficult to replicate or get more information about. And the last, I think these are the few slides that I have. The last few slides, I'll be quick. I'm a little over time, so I'm going to be very quick at this one. Earlier with phone states, if you wanted to read phone numbers, we would actually have it clubbed under read phone state. Now they're separated into two different permissions. So if you have these these permissions being used, like if you're reading phone numbers and things like that, you need additional permissions required. And this again is controlled by policy. So you should also look at the policy part of this change. Lastly, it's conversation APIs. Now you can actually take one of the conversations that you have, like an individual, and make a different priority for it. And that is because some of these conversations are important to the users. So they can actually break the do not disturb. So you could actually pick one of your contacts and say you can override this for most of my settings, which is even if it is on do not disturb, if I get a notification from this particular user, not this particular app, but from this particular user in an app, it will actually override the no disturb mode. And it can also be shown on full on display. If there's a bubble API support, that it will become a bubble by default. So these sort of additional visibility can be added to individual users in the system, and that will help you focus on, rather than giving certain apps privileges like this, you can actually make it for a user identity in that app. And that's it for me. Wrapping up, I want to quickly say that I haven't actually covered all the features. There are plenty more features that are there. I've taken a few screenshots from 9 to 5, which show some of those changes. Things like how screenshot is now completely different, how gesture control can be different, how your battery optimization part of it is battery health is shown to be different. There are how codecs have some changes. So depending on your use cases and your application's needs, there might be other things that will affect you. So don't take this as a comprehensive list. This is more or less like a quick list that I put together of the features uh, that might affect your apps more quickly, and will have an impact on more apps out there. But do evaluate your app with respect to all the features that we've listed out on the site. The developer.android.com has in-depth in-depth data about the changes, as well as each APIs that actually had a change. It also the YouTube channel, Android Developers channel, also has videos explaining these things. So pick whatever suits you better, and but do learn and make the changes required. And don't forget the timelines. We are quite close to the release. We are already in Q3, so we are in beta right now, and the platform stability cycles are running right now. So this is not like you can keep this testing for later. The earlier you test it, the better. That is it from me. Thank you for listening in. And if there are questions, I can take a few. That is my Twitter handle. So in case you wanna hear more about Android, I regularly post stuff about Android and things, Android Kotlin and things like that. So if you wanna know more about things there, please feel free to reach out to me using Twitter. Thank you. I think we'll switch to questions now.
Yeah. Thank you, Amrit, for insightful session. We'll quickly pick up the questions and we can answer them.
Sure. Will Android 11 start showing or support slices created by app developers? Okay, slices as a feature had we have there are a few things that has to be ironed out for that. To be very clear, I am not 100% sure about the status of that. I will have to check and come back to you on this one. Can I use Jetpack Compose in production? I wouldn't recommend it. It's still alpha. There is a lot of work that's happening there. Uh, Jetpack Compose is something that I think at this point of time you should get used to the paradigm. You should get used to that tool, and rather that it is not a production ready tool because a lot of things can change over a period of time. It's still in active development. Uh, yeah, my take on it is that yeah, hold off from putting it into production yet. If I'm starting my career on Android development, should I start with Java or Kotlin? Well, pick whichever language you're more comfortable with. I would say a lot more development right now is happening in Kotlin, so it is not a language that you can avoid. If you start with uh, Java, yes, you can write the same set of functionality with Android, and the toolset does support both of these languages equally well. In the real world, a lot of the top apps and the industry leaders are actually using Kotlin. So if you're looking at it from an employability perspective, you cannot completely avoid Kotlin today. What is would be the prerequisite for becoming an Android GDE? Okay. So for those who don't know what GDE is a Google Developer Expert. It is a title that we give to somebody who is really good. It is a program at Google where we recognize individuals who have strong uh, technical understanding, and we consider them to be experts on the platform. So that it is not only there for Android; it's there for web and many other technologies. And so if you are interested in the program, there are there are a few prerequisites. Some of the things that I would say we generally look for is very strong understanding of the technology landscape, how Android the internals are working and things like that. Strong technical understanding. The other thing that I would personally suggest is have a reputation of somebody who is so you should have some community experience where you're actually sharing information with others. It doesn't mean that you have to be a speaker all the time. Not everybody loves speaking on stage. I totally get that. It could be you could choose any other way of sharing your knowledge. It could be writing blogs, it could be answering Stack Overflow questions. So anywhere you are continuously helping the community improve or people around you improve, that's another quality that we look for in a GD sort of a thing. And also some industry cred in terms of well, if people, there is some credibility to the opinions that the person is giving is also important in being an Android GDE. But from India, where we have had a few GDEs before. In fact, I was the first Android GDE back in 2013 or 12 or 13, and then there were three more people who have actually become GDEs. I think four right now, four more people who have become GDEs after me. And this year, I think we've really accelerated the program, and there are more people who might be joining the program. We're actively trying to look for people who are interested in joining it. So if you think you meet the bar, then definitely apply for the program. It's a good program to be part of. What is the future of Android? So in Fuchsia OS is lined up. I think the whole thing is getting cut off, but yeah, we usually don't talk about the future plans that we do. That is just a regular thing. If you would take any of our events or any of our conversations, open conversations like this, we cannot talk about the future plans. So yeah, any question about future API or what is the future of the OS and things like that, please refrain from asking, because I would not be able to answer that uh, purely from that perspective. Is there any impact on Android 11 in Flutter Android applications? Not no, not like any negative impact. Some of these API changes or behavior changes will also be something that Flutter applications will also have to take care of. Like for instance, the permissions part. Flutter applications will also start seeing that one-time permissions will be there, uh, or foreground services have types declared. So those sort of things will anyway be like whatever the OS is actually adding to as requirements. A different tool, even if you build an app using a different tool, your app will have to work with the rules that the OS is actually running it with. Please share using. Please share use easy starting Android virtual development kits, even virtual environment tools. Uh, I am not an expert on virtual development as such. We have internally some tools that we use, but they are not the ones that are available for external developers. I don't know what all are there, to be very honest. I'm using Android Studio on my device and desktop, so uh, yeah, that might not be a good question for me to answer. I think we had answered that question before, the Android GDE one.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Amrit, for answering these questions. So, folks, even if you have more questions, probably you can share this question with us, and we would be taking it forward if Amrit is available. And as Amrit already mentioned, you can follow him on Twitter, AM Sanjeev, to get more updates on Android and all the sort of stuff. So, Amrit, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the event. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure for me too.
So up next, we have a next session from Somasundaram M, and he'll be talking about what are the new features are there with respect to machine learning in Android platform. So moving forward over to Soma.
Hello. Hello everyone, and welcome. That was a great talk by Amrit, covering almost everything on Android 11. from privacy to everything. So yeah, so this talk is going to be about in respective to machine learning on Android development. So there has been a couple of updates on these. So I will quickly walk you through how you can quickly do machine learning on Android. So a quick introduction about myself. I work for a company called Cube Cinema, and I'm basically from GDG Chennai. I organize it with Abhishek and Varun. So that's quick intro about me. So in Android 11, while we are in the beta phase, Android development has this phase called 11 weeks of Android. Okay, so the idea here is to each week the Android developers will pick up an area and explore it in a much more focus to it. So it covers everything from Android Jetpack to machine learning. So if you are not aware of this, already we are in week 3. Okay, so already we are in week 3, which is about privacy and security. So as you can see, you can take any of these, you can get into any of these programs, like any of the week, and you will have a detailed content, video, as well as articles which you can read and know about Android 11 changes. You can know about Android 11 changes. Okay, so that's about uh, 11 weeks of Android. So once you are taking a week and doing a path, you will also have a learning path which you can complete, and you will also be awarded a badge when you are completing it. So my talk is going to cover mostly about the second week of Android, which was about machine learning. So this happened on the last week. So this week was about privacy. The previous week was about the machine learning. Okay, so this is so we will mainly talk about the new releases that has happened on machine learning, like ML Kit and on-device machine learning. Okay, so this is a new ML Kit was announced. So this SDK is fully focused on-device machine learning. So what is on-device machine learning? So far, machine learning was possible, but it was using a cloud service, and on-device machine learning was very restricted to very certain areas. But now with MLKit SDK, we can do machine learning on any of these any of the things that you see over on the screen. So like text recognition, face detection, language identification. So everything happens on the device. What does it mean on the device? So it is going to be fast uh, because the processing is happening on your device and there is no network latency. The user can be in any region without the network and still on-device machine learning is happening. Okay, so it also works offline, and also the privacy is retained. None of the user's data is taken to the servers, so everything is happening on the device. So privacy is retained over there. So uh, that's MLKit SDK. And how does it benefit? So you can have any kind of use case over it, like text recognition, image detection. So it's a straightforward API, and you can directly use it by just adding your implementation on your Gradle file and start using the APIs. Okay, so there was a previous ML kit which was linked to Firebase. So what if you are already using that? So if you are already using that, we have also covered you. So you can go to this migration guide, developers.google.com/mlkit migration guide, and there you will follow the migration steps. Basically, what you will be doing is taking out this line which you have written in your Gradle, the implementation of face with the new ML kit, which is coming from com.google.com. Okay, so you can do this, and uh, And you can also bundle this with your APK, or you can also sideload it after your APK is installed. You can use the Google Play services. Okay, so in this case, your app is not going to have the model in itself. So your APK is not bloated up like 30 MB or 40 MB. You can have only your APK contents on your app, and you can ask the Play services to download the latest model that you wanted to use in your application. Okay, by this way, you can have your APK size minimal and use the machine learning approach. So to know about all these things on MLKit, you can visit this website where it is detailed out. Okay, so that is about MLKit. So now we will see about how do we implement this MLKit. I will show you like a couple of examples on and use cases where you can use MLKit and take advantage of it. Okay, so the first one is using Camera X, which is another Jetpack library, and doing OCR scanning out of it. Okay, so how do we implement this? First, let's add the dependencies that we want on the Gradle file, like implementation of MLKit, and or we are going to do translate. So we will add MLKit language and MLKit translate as well. And then the camera X dependencies, like camera core, and then the RX, the Android X version of camera. Uh, so we will add all those lifecycle and view dependencies as well. Okay, so once all that is done, and once you have your setup ready for Camera X and you are getting your feed in on your Android app, how do we recognize text which is showing on the camera? So to do that, the first step would be create a detector object. Okay, so the detector object is going to be text recognition. Okay, so here we are going to recognize the text. So we will use this text recognition from the ML kit and get it as a client, and that is going to be our detector. And the next step would be, to add to pass the image into the detector and get the text out of it. So it's a simple API where you will create an input image and pass it, and the detector and you will call detector.process and pass the image. You will have two responses, either a success one or the failure. If it is a success, you will get it as a text, and then you can pass it to your UI. Okay, so that's very straightforward. So how do you pass image to this? You will create an input image type. So you will say input image dot from bitmap. Okay, and then pass the crop bitmap or the entire bitmap, whichever you want to do the text animation. And the next parameter, which is 0 over there, is our rotation type. So if your camera is tilted, you have to pass it the angle of it. So in this case, the camera is not tilted, so we are going to pass just the 0. Okay, so once we do this, we will also close out the image proxy that we have created out. Okay, so quickly uh, we will get the bitmap, convert it into input image from the bitmap, pass it into our detector.process, and on on-click listener, you will have the text which is recognized from the camera view. Okay, so our live demo of it would be something like this. So here the camera feed is getting the text, and we are displaying it on the UI in the first, um, and then we are also translating it in the live feed itself into another language. In this case, it's being Tamil. So if you change the language, the new language model will be downloaded, and then it will show up. It will show up the result. Okay. So using Camera X and MLKit, we have quickly done this. Okay, so this is a very straightforward example, and this is working offline. So everything is working offline. So you, even if the user is not connected to the network, this use case will work. Okay, so if you want to try this out, there is a code lab. You can visit Google Code Lab, which will have this example. So you can download it on your Android Studio and try it out. You will have step-by-step process of how to do it. And the next one is TensorFlow Lite on Android. Okay, so TensorFlow Lite, we have been already using it for a while on Android, but there are not much models on it. So, and Android Studio was not supporting it natively, but now there is an update on this, so that now you can use all the TensorFlow Lite models on your Android. Okay, so TensorFlow Lite with Android. Okay, so let's quickly get. So this is the link of a collab. Okay, so you go to this collab, and so collab is a place where you get your machine learning models trained, which is even though you are not doing, you can also do it on your local machine. Collab is a place where it is easier for most of your tools are already installed, and you will not worry about the Python and the TensorFlow version. Okay, so you can make use of this collab and train your model. Download the trained model. It would be something like model.tf lite. Okay, so once you download this model on your Android project, what you can do is you can click on your module, right click on your module, new, and on other, you will see something called TensorFlow Lite model. Okay, so you will see something called TensorFlow Lite model. Once you click on it, you will see a dialog box like this, where you have to give the path of your downloaded model. Okay, in my case, it is going to be flower model.tflite. Okay, so you once you give the location of the model and you say finish, it will automatically add the dependencies to the build.gradle, and also it will import this file. Okay, so the next screen you will see something like this. The TF Lite model will look, the Android Studio will show the uh, the inputs and outputs of the tensors over here. Okay, so here you can easily uh, check out what would be the input type and its shape, and what would be the output type and also its shape. Okay, so in this case, the shape is 1, 224, 224, 3, and the output shape is 1, 5. Okay, so and it is of type float 32. So this is straightforward, and you also get a sample code at the bottom where you can quickly learn about how to implement this. Okay, so the next thing what you will do is to implement TensorFlow Lite, you will create an new instance of your model. So you will call your model dot new instance and pass a context to it, so that you will get your model. And then you can use the tensor image dot from bitmap and pass the bitmap and convert it into a TF image. Okay, so now you are converting your bitmap into a tensor image. So once these two things are done, once you define your TensorFlow Lite instance and get your model, and also convert your bitmap into a tensor image, you can start using it. So how do you use it? You will say you will get the flower model object, or the model object dot process, and pass the TensorFlow tensor image inside it. Okay, and this will give you outputs, and you can make use of the lambda functions like apply and sort it however you want, and there are much more external functions you can do it, so you can make use of it, and you will get all your outputs as the output. Okay, so once you do that, you have all your outputs, and the next step would be converting the top element into the label. So for that, you can do an for of all the elements that has been identified on the output, and you can map it with the label that you have. Okay, so now we have the output score as well as the output label, and you have also defined it as a list, and now it is easy for you to show it on the UI. So the live demo would be something like this. With the flower model created, which had 5 labels to it, and taking the bitmap and converting it into tensor image and passing it to our flower model and processing it gives us an output, and then the output score and the label is recognized and changed into an list of items, and then it is displayed on the UI. And this works again. It's like the previous demo. It works with camera X, so the light field is coming, and the score is also changing as the image slightly differs. Okay, so that's TensorFlow Lite on Android. Okay, so there is also a new update, which is like TensorFlow Hub. Okay, so the next one is TensorFlow Hub with MLKit. Okay, so if you are new to TensorFlow Hub, TensorFlow Hub is the place where you will it is a repository where hundreds of machine learning models are placed there. It is the contribution is made both by Google and as well as the community members. So you will get most of the model examples that you wanted to try out, pre-trained models that you can directly download and make use of it. Okay, on TensorFlow Hub, there is a filter for TensorFlow Lite. Okay, so some examples of TensorFlow Hub would be the CropNet model, and then the AgriPredict. Okay, so these are some models which would help you detect disease on the tomato plants, and there are many solutions which were not available, which were available only on the cloud, and it was not available on the device, and it was very too power intensive to run on the device. But today you can run any of them on the device offline, and it is going to be seamless. Okay, so it is very power efficient as well. Okay, so once you click on the TensorFlow Lite filter on the TensorFlow Hub, you will see only TF Lite models which you can make use of. Okay, so clicking on any of these TensorFlow Lite models, you will see both version 1 and version 2, and also some models with the metadata. So choose anything which says quanti size. Okay, so that you will it is an with the same accuracy, it is better supported on the TensorFlow Lite when running on Android phones. Okay, so look for these models, and you can directly download it and use it with your ML kit. So you have to download this. Uh, clicking on the download will download the TF Lite model, and as we saw in the previous example, the same process. You will import it into Android Studio by right-clicking on your module and new other and TF Lite TensorFlow model, and you will import this model inside your Android Studio, and then you will have your input and output shapes. You will then define it. You will write your code to process the pass your bitmap and get the output of it, and then label it. Okay. So once you have done that, the output would look something like this. Okay. So that's TensorFlow Hub and MLKit. Okay. So yeah, and there are also some things announced as early access, which I will cover in this. So there is an API called post estimation. What does this API does it like? It is going to give markings of all of the human body parts, where it which says that it is easy for apps like say you have an app for yoga or something, then switching on your camera can help you try out new things. Okay, so this is a post estimation API, as you can see in the image. And there is also something called entity extraction. So far we are doing text extraction. So from an image we are getting out the text, but we haven't figured out a way to identify whether it's an address or it's an email ID or a phone number. So there is also an API coming up for entity extraction, where it will know what entity type it is, whether it's a date or it's a it's an address, so that it will give you, I have identified an address and this is what the text looks like. Okay, so these are some early access which you can request and get access to it and start using it. So yeah, so that's on ML. So then I will show you an highlight of ML that happened on the last week, a short video. Okay, so yeah, that was a brief highlight of machine learning week, which had happened last week. So yeah, that's it from my end, and yeah, thank you. You can ask me if you have any doubts on Twitter, or I will be available to take questions now, like for the next couple of minutes. On yeah, so yeah, you can also participate in this weekly program, which Android 11 weeks of Android is happening. So this is pretty straightforward. You can go to developer.android.com and get started.
Okay. Thank you so much, Som, for taking this session. This was very insightful to see the enhancement that has been done on TensorFlow Lite models for an Android platform. So
Yeah.
only I can give a try on that, and maybe in
Sure.
future you should, yeah, taking some workshops. Sure. So let's take a question from audience. I guess we have few questions here. Okay.
Do you use Firebase ML toolkit for this feature or any other? Which feature do you use? Firebase ML toolkit. So Firebase ML toolkit was previously available. Now it's moved to ML kit. So you have to basically migrate from Firebase ML kit to the normal ML kit SDK. So that's the migration guide that I showed you in my slide. Okay, so if you are using Firebase ML Kit, it's a good time to migrate you to the ML SDK, which has both the bundle version as well as the play service version. You can choose whichever you want. If I have a TensorFlow module, can I be able to upload it on Firebase ML Toolkit and use it? Yeah, if you have created a model out of TensorFlow, you can use it on ML Kit, but before that you have to convert it into TF Lite. So TensorFlow direct models will not work on Android with ML Kit. You have to convert it into TF Lite, and then you can use it on Android with the use of ML Kit. And again, don't use Firebase ML Kit. Just use the ML Kit SDK. And yeah, problems like segmentation, SVM, reinforcement learning. Yeah, you can create your models on TensorFlow, solve your problem, and if that works, you can then convert it into TF Lite and check whether your accuracy has been compromised. And there are techniques to use, and one of which is like quantize. So you can try all of those, and then come up with a TF Lite model and then use it on Android with using YAML. So yeah, it's definitely possible. Just that there might be some problems you will be facing while converting it into a TensorFlow Lite version, but there are ways to solve it.
Yeah, so I guess we are done with the questions. So these are the questions from the audience. So anything else, if you would like to share any link or something for talk, like for the videos, then you can probably share that.
Yeah, sure, I will do that.
And folks who are watching us live, if you have any questions or any further queries, you can reach out to Som and also to us over a platform here, or you can also join our meetup group called GDG Chennai. You can go to meetup.com/GDG Chennai, and you can also follow us on Twitter at the red GDG Chennai. And we have shared the YouTube link that Som was talking about the ML week. So you can go ahead and watch the video. And there are series of videos available there. So probably you can watch all of them. So thank you so much for joining us again for this weekend. If you want to be a part of this community, you can join us again to a meetup group, and we also have a Slack user group, which is gdg.slack.com. So if you go to our meetup page, you will get all the details joining the Slack channel. If you have any questions related to Android 11 or any other platform, you can surely ping us there. So thank you so much for joining, all of you, and thank you so much for taking the session.
Yeah, thank you, Abhishek.